Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts. So, as promised, we begin today our continuing series of translations of the Bible, particularly the New Testament. And today we are focusing on English translations, early English translations, and we will proceed from Old English, Middle English, into Modern English. So let's get started. With many excellent English translations that we have of the Bible today, hundreds and thousands, it's difficult for us to realize that for more than 900 years, English-speaking peoples did not have a complete Bible in their own language. Now, there are at least three reasons for this. Number one, for 1,000 years in the West, church authorities deemed the Latin Vulgate to be the authoritative version, and therefore no need for another translation. Secondly, many clergy had neither the time nor training to produce an English translation. And thirdly, translating the Bible was not only difficult, but in some cases, dangerous. The established church was reluctant to have the Bible translated into other languages. Now, there are some reasons for this, some perhaps maybe even legitimate. But in the end, this is a question you're going to have to decide for yourself. And I hope that if you're an English-speaking person, you'll appreciate the fact that someone did, in fact, translate the Bible into our language. And now we have many translations from which to choose. Nonetheless, portions of the English Bible began to appear from the early Middle Ages. We begin our story of early English Bible translations with the earliest English pope, Caedmon. About 670 AD, Caedmon was attached to the monastery on the Yorkshire coast and turned certain biblical passages into Old English poems for people to memorize. The Venerable Bede said that his songs contained major sections of scripture from Genesis, Exodus, and the book of Daniel. Now let's look at the Venerable Bede. His years are 672 to 735. He's well known as an author, teacher, scholar, and his most famous work is the Ecclesiastical History of the English People. For that reason, he has gained the title as the father of English history. His ecumenical writings were extensive and included several biblical commentaries and other theological works. Among his works are commentaries on Revelation, on the Catholic epistles, commentaries on Acts, the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Luke, and homilies on the Gospels. Let's look next at Alfred the Great, whose years are 849 through 899. Alfred was the king of the West Saxons from 871 to around 886, and the king of the Anglo-Saxons from 886 to 899. He was conscious of the decay of Latin literacy in his realm, and he proposed that primary education be taught in English, with those wishing to advance to holy orders to continue their studies in Latin. There were few books of wisdom, so to speak, written in English, and Alfred sought to increase them through an ambitious court-centered program of translating into English the books that he deemed most necessary for all men to know. Among the books chosen to be translated were Venerable Bede's Ecclesiastical History, Pope Gregory's Pastoral Care, and a portion of the Psalms. And Alfred introduced his law code with translation to the Ten Commandments and portions of Exodus. Now, while these portions may seem insignificant, they did open the door for English readers to grasp the relevancy of scriptures to their life situation. Next, we move to Ælfric, whose years are 955 through 1010. Ælfric was a 10th century abbot, which is the head of a monastery, and he contributed greatly to the education of rural clergy. His major work for our purposes is that he translated the first 6 books of the Old Testament into Old English. This work is known to us today as the Old English Hexateuch, 6 books. His work was revolutionary in that it was the first time that a major portion of the Bible was translated from Latin into Old English. Also notable is that his translation of Genesis, he did not translate it word for word from the Latin Vulgate, which was common at the time due to the belief that the word order of sacred scripture itself was sacred. But he translated much of it by its meaning, a philosophy of translation that will be referred to in the 20th century as dynamic equivalence. And we will later talk about the difference between formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence and how it makes a difference in translating the Bible. Thus, by the 10th century, a few sporadic Old English translations were beginning to be made. Now let's look at some early Middle English translations. By the mid-12th century, a new language, a mixture of Norman and English, marked the beginning of Middle English, the language of Chaucer. The French-speaking Normans conquered England in 1066 and brought cultural and linguistic changes to that nation. For more than 3 centuries, few biblical books were translated into Middle English except for 2 versions of the Psalms as well as smaller portions of Scripture. But over time, conditions were ripe for a robust and complete Bible in English. That need would be fulfilled by an Oxford scholar, John Wycliffe. So let's take a few minutes of time to look at John Wycliffe, his translation and its impact. John Wycliffe was an English scholastic reformer, theologian, biblical translator, priest, and seminary professor at the University of Oxford. He became an influential dissident within the Roman Catholic priesthood during the 14th century and is considered an important predecessor to Protestantism. Wycliffe questioned the privileged status of the clergy, which had bolstered their powerful role in England, and the luxury and pomp of local parishes and their ceremonies. Wycliffe advocated translation of the Bible into the common language of the people, and he is said to have completed translation directly from the Latin Vulgate into Middle English, a version now known as Wycliffe's Bible. It's therefore a secondary translation, meaning it is a translation of a translation. It's probable that Wycliffe personally translated the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. And it's possible he also translated the entire New Testament, while his associates translated the Old Testament. His Bible appears to have been completed by 1384, and additional updated versions being done by his assistant John Purvey and others in 1388 and 1395. Still, Wycliffe was the direct inspiration, the prime mover of the project, and carried out much of the work himself. This 1388 edition was produced by one of Wycliffe's followers, John Purvey, and this version became the predominant English Bible to the time of William Tyndale's Bible 143 years later. There still exist about 180 manuscripts, complete or partial, containing Wycliffe's translation in its revised form. Now, how was it received by commoners, and how was it received by the church? Well, the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church condemned Wycliffe's Bible. John Purvey and Nicholas Hereford, who helped revise Wycliffe's Bible, were thrown into prison, and some of their friends were burned at the stake with Bibles tied around their neck. At a church synod in Oxford in July 1408, Archbishop Arundel forbade the reading of the Wycliffe Bible. The decisions reached at the synod are known as the Constitutions of Oxford. They prohibit the unlicensed laity from teaching or writing theology or translating the Bible into English, in direct reaction to Wycliffe's translation. Here's a part of what Archbishop Arundel wrote about Wycliffe in a letter to the Pope, Pope John XXIII, in 1411. This pestilent and wretched John Wycliffe, of cursed memory, that son of the old serpent, endeavored by every means to attack the very faith and sacred doctrine of the Holy Church, devising to fill up the measure of his malice the expedient of a new translation of the Scriptures into the mother tongue. In another statement from the Synod of Oxford in July 1408, we read this: "It is a dangerous thing, as witnesses blessed St. Jerome, to translate the text of Holy Scripture out of one tongue into another. For in the translation, the same sense is not always kept. We therefore decree and ordain that no man hereafter by his own authority translate any text of the Scripture into English or any other tongue, by way of a book, pamphlet, or treatise, and that no man read any such book, pamphlet, or treatise, now lately composed in the time of John Wycliffe, or since, or hereafter to be set forth in part or whole, publicly or privately, upon pain of excommunication, until said translation be approved by the ordinary of the place of, or, if the case so require, by the council provincial. He that shall do contrary to this shall likewise be punished as a favorer of heresy and error." However, this threat of penalties had a reverse effect on the common people. It only aroused curiosity to know exactly what had Wycliffe written. What could it be that could arouse such anger of the church? So Wycliffe's Bible not only provided an English Bible, but it spurred English literacy. Now, John Wycliffe also had a profound impact upon the Bohemian reformer Jan Hus, or we could call him John Huss. Students from Bohemia came to Oxford to study and sat at the feet of John Wycliffe and took his views back to their country. Hus heard of these teachings from his students and became enamored with them, believed them, fell into agreement with them, began speaking about them and teaching and promulgating them, and in time he himself sparked a reformation in Bohemia. But eventually Hus was tried and condemned at the Council of Constance in 1415 and eventually burned to the stake for his beliefs. There's another amazing story to be told about Jan Hus. Off the top of my head, actually, one of the best resources for the Council of Constance and Jan Hus is from an author named Matthew Spinka, S-P-I-N-K-A. The church so hated Wycliffe that it is at the Council of Constance they took the opportunity, some 30 years after his death, to have his bones dug up from his grave, burned, and the ashes scattered into the nearby River Swift. Now, the next 150 years after Wycliffe's death saw increasing political and cultural unrest in Europe. In the 15th century, Europeans had suffered deep religious anxiety linked to famine, war, and disease. There was a growing distrust of the church with its power, its luxury, and the corruption among many of the priests. And Wycliffe and Hus had begun the fire that was smoldering for change in the church. The church still opposed translations of the Bible into the vernacular or other languages, but the desire was great among the people to read the Scriptures in an understandable English translation. Latin was the language of the church leaders and scholars, but not the common man. So let's talk about the beginning of vernacular Bibles. In the late 15th century, we do see the beginning of the translation of the Bible into vernacular language approved by the church. Italian, 2 versions by 1471 and 16 by the end of the century. French, the New Testament in 1477, the entire Bible in 1487. Into Spanish, 1478. Into Dutch, 1477. Now, in German, Luther's Bible in 1521, which had been preceded by 19 other German versions. But one man would come to the aid of the English-speaking people for a Bible in their language. That man would be William Tyndale. In our next episode, we will take a look at this man, William Tyndale, what he did, how he was opposed, hunted down, eventually burned at the stake, and the amazing results of his translation of the Bible and its effect upon England. So, I'm hoping you enjoy this today. Please like, subscribe. Have any comments, let me know. Questions, I'll do my best to chase them down and give the best answer I can. But of course, in the comments, you will see many links that will help you further your own research, come to your own conclusions about Bible translations. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Did it help preserve the teachings of the church? Or did it lead to a corruption and further heresy? Anyway, till next time, we'll see you then.